welcome this evening or this afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We're so glad that you can join us for this evening's program about instructional design. Hopefully this will be one of many virtual programs that you'll make it out to for Kenyon this year. And I'm happy to throw it over to our moderator, Matt Colburn, to get us started.
Okay, so I'm Matt Colburn. I was an instructional designer for a year, January to December 2021. And our panelists have much more experience in the field and will answer all the questions that I ask in great detail. Did you all want to introduce yourselves in your role first, Melissa and Rebecca?
Sure. Rebecca, go ahead.
Yeah.
I'm Becky Hoyt, class of '99. I was an anthropology major while at Kenyon. I work in the world of industrial supply distribution, and I'm in the learning and development department at my company. I've been doing this work for about 10 years, and prior to that, I was a high school counselor for 10 years. Okay, and I'm sorry, I'm switching modes.
And hi, I'm Melissa Henderson Koenig, class of '88. And I was a psychology major at Kenyon, had almost enough credits to have a fine art major as well. I've been in the field tangentially for about 20 years, although I did some instructional design work prior to that. So I come from a library background as well, I have a master's in library science. But I've been at DePaul University in a variety of different roles for the last 20 years. And currently I'm the director of instructional technology in our Center for Teaching and Learning.
Okay, thank you for those introductions. I suppose I should give a fuller introduction. I graduated from Kenyon in 2000, English major, and I was an instructional designer at Howard Community College in Maryland. First question to our panelists: why did you enter instructional design? What was your career path? Was it straight, or did you enter different fields before entering this one? Might have already spoken to this, but any more details?
Yeah, it sounds like Becky's having some tech issues, so I'll go first on this one. So definitely not a straight path. When I graduated from Kenyon, I thought I wanted to go into marketing and nonprofit marketing. Also, it was the 90s, so there were no jobs. So I worked retail for a fair number of years. While I was at Kenyon, my work study job was in the library. And Jamie Peely, who was the librarian at the time, said to me when I graduated, you know, if you ever want to go to library school, I'd be happy to write your recommendation. And I was like, yeah, I'm not going to library school. And 2 years later, I was like, yeah, could you write me that recommendation now, please? So I went back and got a master's in library science from University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana, and actually did that as a distance student, although pre-internet. So I drove down once a week on Fridays to complete that degree while I was working at the Shedd Aquarium in their library. I then worked at the University of Illinois at Chicago in their library. I had a very interesting job there. I like to tell people I was Google before Google. I worked on a contract position there where people who had purchased encyclopedia called the New Standard Encyclopedia could write in, could send questions in, and I answered their questions, gave them the bibliography, some brief information. So I basically gave them Google results. And I did that for a couple of years and then joined the residency program there before starting at DePaul. When I was in the library, I started to do library instruction, which meant that, you know, you have to dissect or break down complex search strategies and things like that, and started to look at online delivery of that. We used to do 100 or so bibliographic instruction sessions a quarter or a semester for students, and we were looking at ways to deliver that. So it kind of fell into instructional design. When I started at DePaul, my position was a blended position. So I was part in the library and then part in what was then the instructional design and development department, and then transitioned fully about 15 years ago, fully into the Center for Teaching and Learning space, where I've done a variety of things, including program development for online and programs, but then also now managing all the technologies and matching that, making sure that delivery works, pieces of it. So definitely not a straight path, very curvy path, but I do feel like the liberal arts education and my psychology background, gave me a good basis to be creative and be able to take the curveballs as they came and, create. In most of my jobs, they sort of said, here's the general gist of what you're going to do, figure it out and make something. So I feel like all those things were things that I learned at Kenyon. So.
That's funny because a few of your comments, I, just kind of fell into it and I had to figure it out on the way. That feels like instructional design, just the state of it right now. After Kenyon, I worked in college admissions for a brief bit and realized I wanted to work more with the learners instead of the people entering college. And so I also looked at library school, Melissa. Did not go in that direction. I ended up finding a role as a school counselor, and I pursued my master's in education and school counseling. And with that role, I had a lot of instructional design. It was just more traditional in the classroom, working with students one-on-one or small groups, or even a full classroom series with like an English teacher talking about academic integrity through the viewpoint of research paper writing and such. So I had experience with the writing and decided to have a career change. My husband is also a teacher, and 2 education salaries does not really work. So I left and went to the private business world, where I just, again, someone heard that I had this experience and they said, would you be interested in trying it here? And I said, sure, let's go for it. Like you said, with your psychology background, I also feel like my anthropology degree really helped me, because it gives me the perspective of trying to help all learners, not just a very specific set of learners, a very specific persona, I guess. I try to step back and think about where all of my learners are coming from, instead of what I would like and how I would like to learn. And especially in the world of, asynchronous delivery, I feel like I have to be more aware of that, because there's also the tech issues layered on, which I apologize for. I'm not sure what's going on with my laptop. It's actually still running in the other room, even though it's closed. So I don't know what's going on there. But I feel like your Kenyon education and the idea of writing and research really supports a role like this.
Thanks very much for those detailed answers. And as Kim is saying in the chat, please feel free to pose any questions you all might have. And then after I ask some questions, we'll have time for people to jump in with their own questions. The next question I had was, what do you like about instructional design and what do you dislike about it? So whoever wants to jump in.
I think for me, what I like about it is the puzzle piece, right? So it's especially since most of my experience has been trying to figure out how do you translate what you're doing in person in the classroom into the online environment. So really working closely, most recently with faculty in terms of them, saying, well, I do this activity in the classroom, and how am I going to translate that into a synchronous space? How do I keep my students engaged in an online discussion? Sort of how do I reimagine that space? And so I think that, to me, that's the piece, that puzzling through and solving a problem is really intriguing. And then the fact that no 2 days are the same. Plus, I get to learn about all sorts of really cool topics I would never learn about. So I've worked with faculty across the college, and so most recently I'm the liaison with the College of Law. So I've worked with faculty building courses on drone law and health law, and so I've gotten to learn a lot of stuff there. And then but I've worked with all sorts of faculty, so it's really cool. You kind of get to keep learning. I think the frustrating pieces are always when the technology fails you, right? Where you can't solve the problem, or where you're working with a vendor, which is what I do a lot nowadays, where they tell you they're going to release something, or this is going to work the way, the salesperson will tell you it's going to work one way, and then in practice it doesn't work that way. And then sort of having to manage those expectations with faculty, or having to take away a technology that somebody is really attached to, but it's gotten too expensive and there's not enough adoption that we just can't afford to keep it. And sort of managing that, all that change management for me in my current position is probably the hardest part.
I think the thing that I'm most excited about is also my biggest frustration. So working at a private company in a department of 4 people, and we're a company of about 5,000 employees. I've had to learn a lot that I didn't anticipate I would need to learn. We don't have a traditional marketing department or a visual design team or anything like that. So part of my personal development in the role has been teaching myself the Adobe suite. So Illustrator and InDesign and Premiere Plus and other software that I never thought I would need to use. And so that's, it's exciting, and it's a skill that I've used in other areas of my life, and I'm very glad I have it. But at the same point, there isn't a lot of time. So you do a lot of learning on the go with tools like this, and you make a lot of mistakes along the way, but you can see your development over time. And I've started teaching other people some of the tools. So that's been helpful to my confidence in using the tool as well. Like Melissa said, with not necessarily knowing your topic. Yeah, I mean, I've only been the subject matter expert twice in 10 years. So I've learned a lot about different areas of the company. I've learned about products. I've learned about distribution, how warehouses work and things like that. Again, things that I never thought I would learn. So that's also been a really positive part of my role, is learning something every day.
Okay. Thank you for those answers. Looks like we have some comments in the chat, some questions in the chat, that is. Victoria, did you want to ask your question, or I could ask it for you?
Sure, I'll ask it. Yeah, over time, as lots of instructors start adopting similar strategies that are recommended for engaging online learners, I find that what starts out as positive becomes overwhelming. And an example is weekly discussion forums. If a learner has 1 or 2 courses requiring that, it's great. If they have 4 or 5, they just can't keep up. And another example, which is a good strategy in universal design for learning, having small assignments which don't have a lot of weight in the grade assigned to them instead of a few really large ones. Again, that's great in 1 or 2 courses. If all your courses are doing it, it just becomes this constant barrage of mini assignments throughout a semester. So that was my question, is how does one use instructional design strategies, which have proven to be really beneficial for a single course, while also taking into account that learners are going to be having quite possibly cumulative impacts if other courses are doing the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a really good point. One of the things that we, you know, I think that I don't know if I have a good answer for that. Becky, I don't know if you do. And you're working with corporate learners, so it's a little bit different too. But definitely when you're talking about a student who's in a fully online program now, we have very few fully online programs at DePaul. We don't have like a that are fully online. I think that one of the strategies that we try to employ with faculty who are teaching in fully online programs, so usually with our students, they're taking one online class to augment their face-to-face classes, to give some flexibility in their schedules, or, you know, because they're a student athlete or because they work or whatever. But is to include very clear like time schedules, so some estimate on how much time certain things are going to take, and that way students are better able to sort of look at their courses and understand that this module and these activities are going to take approximately X amount of time, and then can prioritize that. One of the things that I think we hear a lot of frustration around, and I was just at a conference when they were talking about like, where did the post once, respond twice theory of discussion boards come from? And that's such an unnatural space, right? Like you don't do that in the classroom. You don't say you have to talk 500 words with citations, and you know, and so how do you simulate discussion? At the beginning of the pandemic, as everyone went online, we actually ran some pilots with a variety of discussion tools outside of our learning management system to try to, you know, account for that, because we knew that was going to be the biggest frustration for faculty used to teaching face-to-face. And we honestly none of the tools did, but they all had some positives. But we're now looking at things like gamification, and then also looking at social annotation as a different way of dealing with discussion that isn't the post once, respond twice sort of method. So I think that, you know, that the formulaic piece of like every course is going to look like this, there's something good about that, and students and programs really like that and appreciate that they can expect that there's going to be a quiz and a, you know, like there's a rhythm and a cadence to it. But you're right, there is a cumulative effort or effect to it.
Okay, thank you.
It is different for me, as Melissa said, since I am more on the corporate side, but we had a really fast and hard transition to online, as everybody did in 2020. And with suddenly 30% of our workforce working from home full time, but 70% still in person, since we are a distribution company, we had to quickly mix things up. So all of what were 100% in-person discussions, I'm thinking more like our company onboarding series, not our specific job training, but it all went to 100% remote and required, you know, more layers in terms of tools and training for people to use the tools than we anticipated. So then we tried to go to discussion boards because it was all online, and it just our learners were just very direct and told us it wasn't engaging, they weren't learning. Again, kind of a difference with working with adults in the workplace instead of students. And so we stepped back, and we now have hybrid. So any of your assignments, any of your submissions are all asynchronous we use Workday as our LMS provider. And then your discussions are small group. If you're in the building that day, because now we're on like a hybrid work schedule, if you're in the building that day, you'll be in a room together, but your facilitator might be in another state. So you are still using Zoom to communicate, but you might have a small group of people with you, which helps for people who want that connection. We always offer that you can come into the office on one of your learning days, because we know that someone from our warehouse or distribution center will be there. But some people prefer to just have the Zoom experience on their own and go that way. And we've had better success than our initial switch to Zoom, because now we've really figured it out. And then it's definitely better than having the discussion boards for people to participate in.
Okay, thank you both. I'm going to jump around in the questions. Aaron Salva, did you want to ask your question? Hello to Aaron Salva, my old friend from Kenyon, who helped me get through the years.
Yeah, good to see you. I mean, I just, because there are no two learners that are the same, and many of us, learn differently. I wondered if either of you have ever, asked learners what it is that they benefit from and what it is they might find difficult in the instructional design format.
I know we do. We have actually, we've done some usability testing at various times, but we do currently have just been building up in the last couple of years in a UX team within our department. And so we do have students then that come in, and we will test, we'll ask them questions about how they navigate the spaces. We'll ask them questions about like a template that we might be thinking about using with a program, whether it's confusing or not. We're having some faculty come in and do some focus groups for us on our new high tech rooms that allow for teaching in class and remote and asynchronous students all at the same time. So yeah, we definitely try to do that. We don't do as much as we would like, but we do try to do that. And a number of our staff all teach as adjuncts. And so I actually find that is the best way of learning what is confusing. Like, you've done all that you thought was the best design, and then your student is like, I don't understand what you want me to do. And then you're like, okay, well, I see how this does not make any sense. And so they kind of call you out on it. And you learn a bunch of stuff that you wouldn't have learned even if you just talk to students. I think you wouldn't necessarily learn it. So we're very lucky in the fact that there are those opportunities for us within the university to teach, and that our boss is very supportive of us teaching just for that reason. There's two reasons. One is you learn what it's like to be the teacher and have to go through it. And the second is it gives you a little street cred when you're working with a faculty member to be able to say, in my class, this is how I do it. And they're like, oh, okay, like you've done this as well. So, but yeah, that's a really good point.
To add on to that, we do a lot of what Melissa says, but then we also have a step at the end. So did the learning do what we wanted it to do? Are the performance outcomes matching what the design, what the learning objectives were for the lesson? And if they're not, we have more than just a UX. We do more in-depth listening sessions with both learners and trainers, again, because there's some in-person component to all of our learning, and then with management to understand where our gaps are and potentially redesign the learning because it's missing something that is necessary for skill development.
I actually had a question for the audience, just so I can get a sense of who's here. If you're a recent graduate, whatever your definition of a recent graduate is, maybe last 5 years, do write so in the chat, and then I'll know where to steer the conversation. Looks like we might not have any recent graduates, but I can't tell because the cameras are off. And you all look so young anyway that, who would know whether you're recent or not.
It was a nice save.
Okay, I don't think we have any recent graduates, despite appearances. That helps to know which questions not to necessarily ask. Okay, Margaret McClintock, did you want to ask your question?
Hey, no, you can go ahead.
Okay. Okay, Margaret says, do you use storyboards? Do you have any specific applications that you recommend for storyboarding?
Yeah, storyboarding is a big part of my job when we're developing new e-learning videos specifically, not necessarily interactive things. We do a lot of safety training online, a lot of, different regulations, sexual harassment prevention training, things like that. So storyboarding does allow me to work with the expert, my subject matter expert, and say, am I on the right track? Is this what you're thinking? But also from a visual perspective, is this the art you'd like to use? My company uses Adobe Suite, so I do a lot of storyboarding in InDesign and a lot of my content creation in Illustrator. We don't use stock photos. We just don't. It's not something the company wants us to do. So I also have become a photographer. If you can consider me taking my phone around the facility and taking pictures, really being a photographer. But also Adobe Suite has great editing software, so you can make just about anything look decent. But in the past, when I didn't have Adobe Suite, when I worked in a public school, I would sometimes just use, paper and pencil and draw out what I thought something would look like if I was doing some, a PowerPoint. But then also in PowerPoint, depending on the software you're using, if you use Camtasia as your video production, you can import slides directly from PowerPoint. And so there are a lot of different ways that you can storyboard. It just really is using the resources that you have available. And, a lot of this job is just being really creative and just trying to find interesting solutions.
Yeah, and I think, kind of to build on that, for us, the units that we have two groups within the Center for Teaching and Learning that do more storyboarding because they're doing video or animation types of things. For the most part, we don't build, we're not building anything that's like a canned presentation, if that makes sense. So we're not building a learning unit. We're working with faculty who are putting their materials into, a learning management system. And because those materials because of the way that we do that in some university settings, the online education is very scripted, right? So it's the university hires the faculty member to build the content. That content is storyboarded and it's designed and it's produced, and then it's like a textbook, right? It's a publisher thing that the faculty member might get royalties for, and then it's deployed to any number of faculty. The faculty member who created the subject matter expert may or may not be the person who teaches it. That's not the model for the most part that's used at DePaul. So the faculty member owns the content, and so we're just working with them to make it easy for them to translate the materials. So in that sense, what we do is backwards design with the faculty. So we work off of a course blueprint in which they're going to tell us what are the objectives for each of the weeks or units, that however they want to split their course up. We don't define that either. So for a quarter system, they can do it by week, they can do it by module, learning unit, whatever they want. So what are the objectives? What are the things that, how are those things going to be assessed? What are the things the students need? And what are the things that need to be created in order for the students to do it? So, and then depending on the faculty, it depends. But we'll do all the way up to a white glove service where they just hand us that blueprint and we just build everything for them, or they use that blueprint and then we provide them with support. But as Becky said, there's a lot of tools out there that you can use for that. Storyboarding comes in handy when you're doing video animation or doing sort of like a produced course, right? Because you want it to be a cohesive, not that you don't want other courses to be cohesive, it's just a different, I think it's a different beast when you're trying to build it, so.
Okay, Tom Witherspoon, are you there? Did you want to ask your question?
I am here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. Well, I'm a technical writer, so I'm not an instructional designer, but I've worked with many IDs over the years, and so I've been, my main frustration in my career has always been to try to get employers to move away from the traditional PDF documentation to make people learn, because I keep trying to tell people we've got a whole generation of people coming up who do not look at PDFs at all. And it's been, one fight after another. So any tips, advice, magic charms you can give me to make this work, that would really be helpful. Thank you very much.
Oh, Tim, if I had that answer, I would even say it's not just PDFs. I have difficulty getting people to read 2-line emails. So I think it really is just people aren't reading everything that's in front of them any longer. So expecting a learner to read a text dense document, it's just not going to happen. They're going to get overwhelmed very quickly and move on. So we use an intranet as point of need services. So we have a lot of different, they are PDF documents, but when you put them on electronically, they look, it's navigated like a website. So people are able to find answers to rare questions and look through those documents quickly. If it's something that is more going to be used interactively, like thinking more on the job training, we also say, well, how is something going to be applied? If you're going to be doing something, reading about it doesn't help you learn it. You have to actually do the thing to learn it. So it's really getting people to step back and say, what is the end result you want? Is this skill-based? Is this knowledge-based? Is it compliance-based? Because, sometimes that's even different. And how do you want people to walk away? When working with adults, the more you can make it very specific to what they need to do their job and very actionable in the way that they're going to use what they're learning, that's the best method to get people to learn. They'll walk away much faster. We see such a huge return on the development time, that instructional development time and the delivery time. Then if we have someone read something, it's, our learning curve was cut by 6 months by rolling out new strategies and such. And that's in the business world, that's huge, to get someone to FTE 6 months earlier. When it comes to traditional education, and I'm thinking back to when I was a counselor, but also I'm a student, I take classes online all the time as my own learning development to learn about new technologies, learn about new skills that I can use in my job, and then also just like fun stuff that I want to learn. I give a lot of feedback to professors that reading isn't helpful if it's not going to be the way you're going to use the information later. And I've had some professors respond very quickly saying, yes, I understand. I don't know how to pull this together. And it's usually at a university where they don't have someone like Melissa to help. And I've had professors just pretty clearly say, this is the way I had to learn it. It's the way you're going to have to learn it. It's, if I could do it, you could do it too. So I think that there is a natural transition as people see that development happens faster when you change modes. But I think people who have gone through the system and it worked for them are most reluctant to change it for others.
Yeah, and I think just to build on that too, is that thinking about, the way the document is formatted. So we love technical writers. I have a technical writer on my staff. And, that dense things that are very rich and dense in text, like they have to be scannable, right? Like it has to be easy, and visuals is the other. So, having, and that it's huge, it's a huge problem because our systems now, they update monthly. And so keeping up with that is really difficult. So we really struggle with, our learning management system. We used to host and we used to get updates twice a year. And now it's monthly, right? And so we used to have short videos that walk people through things. There are some software solutions out there. Unfortunately, it really depends on your environment as to whether or not you can deploy them. But they are, WalkMe is one, WhatFix is another. There's a variety of them. They're walkthrough softwares that overlay on top of a system, and you build a learning path through. And so when you have a question, instead of going to a document, you ask the question, and you might say, like, how do I make my course available, right? And it will then walk you through the steps. So it just moves the cursor around the screen, and as you move it, you're doing it, and when you finish it, you've done it, right? So again, just like Becky said, like something that is, you know, you are doing it versus watching somebody do it versus reading about somebody doing it, like actually doing it. The hard part with those types of systems is that unless you control the computers that you're working with, they're usually some sort of browser extension, which adds the layer of complexity. There are some systems in which they have been able to integrate. Usually they're ERP type systems that have those in them, so you might have used them. And you see this a lot on websites, but they have like the help chat and all of that sort of built into the system. It's there, you don't have to go someplace else. And I think that's really where the future of some of this, in terms of especially workplace learning, is going to go. Of like, I don't know, I need to know it until I need to know it, and now I need to know it now. And it needs to be easy to consume, and I need to be able to follow it without having to break my stride or you know, call somebody, right? Because I need, like, my boss is asking me to do something that I don't know how to do, and I need to figure out how to do it.
Yeah, it's become so much more about curation instead of creation. I know we're looking into a program, it's called Degree Lens, that curates lots of external items, everything from YouTube videos to news channels. It really is, you kind of set up your subscription as you want. And because we don't hire specialists for really any role, and everybody is expected to learn and develop themselves, we just could never anticipate all of the needs that people would have from a creation standpoint. So yeah, I definitely agree, Melissa. This is just, it changes every day, just the expectations and the technology and everything. And I have no idea what my job's going to look like even in 2 or 3 years. Yeah, and I love that. I love the variety there.
Yeah, and I think too, the other thing that we've worked with, we used to put guides in the classroom, for example, about how to use the technology in the classroom, like how to turn your projector on. And then we now have these technology enhanced classrooms that allow, you know, their Zoom rooms, they allow for, which is different than a room in Zoom. Anyway, they're much more complex, and we thought, well, what are we going to do? And the technology changes, and then you've got to reprint 20 pages, and somebody's going to take the 20 pages. So we've moved to using QR codes for a lot of things, and then that takes you to the web page. The web page is searchable. You can find just the piece that you need, and when we can make sure that all the data is updated. So I think that's another really big thing, is making sure, again, that your documents are scannable, your documents are readable, they're chunked, so you can easily just get to the section that you need. And then using QR codes and anchors to kind of help navigate that space allows people to do that quickly on their phones as well.
Okay. Victoria, it looks like you have another question. Do you want to ask?
Sure, thank you. Yeah, this is related to the problem of inflexibility, or employers not realizing that there are opportunities with the new technology that didn't exist before. I found when we moved online during the first part of the pandemic, I won't say during the pandemic because it's still here, when we moved online during the first part, it opened up a whole new world for me, because I was able to, instead of being stuck with, okay, you have to have 3 contact hours in the classroom every week, I was able to say, we'll have 1.5 hours, and I'll take that extra 90 minutes and I'll ask you to be looking at resources on the internet, videos as well as written resources that are in the voices of the people whose experiences we're talking about. And it just makes so much more sense for you to do that than for me to look at them and then give you a lecture where I summarize them. And it was wonderful. And so we would meet in the 90 minutes that we met, we would discuss those resources. It was like a flipped classroom, basically, and it was wonderful. But back to face, absolutely not. You know, the students have to be in the classroom for 3 hours every week. And it's very difficult to get the employer to understand that what we could do online has applications that are really valuable face-to-face as well. And I'm just wondering if anyone has any suggestions for how to break through that inflexibility.
Yeah, I think, you know, there's some suggestions here around data. I mean, I think data, you know, I don't know, I learned in Kenyon that, you know, statistics are awesome. There's lies, damn lies in statistics, right? You can get data to tell whatever story you want. But I think making sure that they're, you know, doing some sort of pre or post test, doing student surveys. We ask students, we're in the situation right now with, we have, I don't know, 9 different modalities. There's way too many for classes coming out of, you know, lockdown, right? So, you know, but then figuring out like which modalities do we keep? Do we just throw everything out? Do we, you know, and so really talking to the population and asking them about what they want and why they want it. I think that those are very powerful stories. But I do think there is a lot to say about the fact that the experiential learning, right? So case studies, having people, goes back to what Becky was saying, right? Like if we want people to be able to apply it, we need to ask them to apply it, not just read about it, not just listen to people talk about it, but to actually take that information, gather that information, and then apply it doing something, right?
Right.
And so, you know, I think that the students are more engaged, and ultimately they learn more because they've had to work through, right? Like you've probably all taught something at some point where everyone's like, oh, that was easy. And then somebody goes to do it, or you've had this experience and you were like, well, it was really easy when you did it. And how come I can't figure it out just because you watched versus doing? And so I think, you know, there's definitely research that shows that that is a good way to learn. It's definitely not the way everybody learns, but I think having those opportunities, and then you know, again, going back to finding ways to survey the students or ask the population that you're serving, to ask them what the modalities are or the ways that they want to get that information and what they find most beneficial, and using those stories to make a case.
Yeah. And I think part of it is logistical, that the students are on campus for their other courses. Where are they going to go for your, is partly that, and is partly the employer wants the students on campus every day, because then they're using the dining hall and they're spending money in other ways. And yeah, so I understand that there are barriers that are not necessarily related directly to pedagogy.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think, you know, certainly we you know, we have those conversations, right? But I do think that, you know, hybrid was a thing prior to the pandemic, where students came to campus once a week for the in-person class, and that was where, you know, where that flipped kind of classroom of you're doing work ahead of, you know, whether that's the homework problems or whatever, and those are happening in an asynchronous space or an online space, and then when you come to campus, then that time is spent. One of the things that we do when we do workshops for faculty is we like a grid that's like, what are the things that are high touch, things that you can only do in person, right? Like you cannot replicate, they have to be done in person. What are the things that you can do alone by yourself? And then, you know, the things that fall in between on the other parts of the quadrant. And I think that's a helpful worksheet to kind of say, like, you know, and I know like in physics education, they did a lot of this where they kind of flipped things, and students were doing problems without any instruction, right? It's very frustrating for students, except that then when they came, like they had to come up with the formulas basically on their own. And then the class was sort of deconstructing how they got there. And, they found that students learn physics better. So.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, looks like we have time for about one more question. And I think I'll ask it even though not necessarily have many recent graduates. I think I'll ask it anyway, because you could always change career paths. What would you recommend for anyone who's interested in entering the field of instructional design, and what stepping stones or actions could they take to enter the field?
So you have to wear all sorts of hats in this field. So I think having a broad knowledge of how people learn is important. Taking, there are great programs in adult learning or higher ed and such. I mean, even just reading, and I'm thinking about it more from like a business perspective, just reading like a lot of Malcolm Knowles and understanding like how do adults learn and how do they prefer to learn is important. So there's definitely like you should have some basic psychology knowledge and anthropology, and just really wanting to be around people and wanting people to succeed. It's knowing that you're not going to be the subject expert. You're not going to be building things that you teach. You're going to be helping other people design and pull their ideas together. And you're really about how does this delivery translate into, for me, people getting to work faster? What is the business need and how do I get people there? So it's being willing to learn the tech and being willing to try something that maybe makes you uncomfortable, because learning should be a little bit uncomfortable. That means it's working. It means you're not in your safety zone. And then, one of the things that I have found has helped me in my role and me in my job is always asking questions, always being curious, always saying, why does this translate this way? Why do you want this way? You really have to understand what I consider my customer, what they want and what they're looking for. And if you're not able to have those conversations and really just connect and communicate well, you're not going to have a good product. So I think that's something that Kenyon has prepared everyone for, is having those in-depth conversations, being aware that more questions is better, and really figuring out what the problem is before you even attempt a solution. And then, just you have to be someone who's willing to not know what tomorrow brings, and not just willing to not know, but kind of finding that a little bit exciting and knowing that you're walking into something new. And when you have an assignment that gets put to you, it might start completely different from how it ends, because the person who's brought you the question isn't a learning specialist. They're a shipping specialist or whatever it is in your company or your school or university. And so it's being willing to kind of travel along the way and be excited with them about the outcome, not being willing to just do what they say they want to do.
Yeah, I think all of those things, and then a willingness to listen. I think that's maybe the biggest part is, as Becky said, it's not your content. And so being willing to listen to what somebody is trying to do, and then, being able to act upon that. Flexibility for sure. I kind of think about, so my staff, a lot of my staff end up becoming instructional designers or moving into that space. I think within our department, we have 2 staff members who actually went to school for instructional design. The rest of them have come from a variety of fields. A lot of them are writers. I have some I have a computer scientist, writers, game designer. So they come from a variety of fields. I think if you aren't already in the field, one entry point is in the technical support space, where you kind of start to learn how people use technology, what their questions are. So that's my team. My team does all the support for all of the learning technologies at the university. So they answer all the tickets, they do the trainings, and so that doing trainings on technology is sort of the gateway in some ways into instructional design, because you have to take a complex system, you have to break it down, you have to teach it to learners, right? And so I think that if you're thinking about it and you're not already in the field, it sounds like most of you are in the field or somewhere in the field, but I think if you were giving advice, if I was giving advice, that's a gateway in. And then usually then you can build enough skills that you're like, okay, I get how this works now, and I can move into the instructional design space. But that's kind of the trajectory that seems to work at our university, is that most of our instructional designers we grew in-house. And we started it with graduate assistants, right? So they started in our department as a graduate assistant. They were in some sort of random department, and we gave them a tuition waiver, so they like their jobs in our department, and then they learn then about this space that they didn't know existed, and from there they kind of get hooked, and they start in the support areas and then move into instructional design. So but there's a lot of other ways. Like I said, we have a game designer that works with us and is building a game-based learning space. So we have animators and game designers that work in that space. And then we do our own in-house video. So there's a lot of videographer, editors. So, that type of space that we pull people in that might have been traditionally thinking about, doing a film career. And then they're like, oh, I can do instructional videos. Great. That's like something I didn't think about. So we have a lot of documentary filmmakers and things like that kind of move into that space. So I think there's a lot of opportunities. Just people don't always know that the opportunity exists. And then once they do, they tend not to leave.
Okay. Thank you to Rebecca and Melissa very much for answering all the questions and being our panelists. And thank you to Kim for putting this program together, and I'll throw it over her to close the meeting.
Thanks, Matt, and thanks, Melissa and Becky, and thank you to everyone who participated so robustly tonight. I hope you found this useful. We have recorded, as you probably noticed, this was recording, so we will share out that recording probably early next week. So if you want to share it with any of your colleagues or friends who might find this conversation useful, please feel free to do so. And we hope to see you on screen at another event or on the Hill sometime soon. So thank you so much, and have a great evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. Thanks again.
Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.